Thank you so much for being here. My name is Rachel Copeland, and I am a bookseller at Boswell Book Company, which is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Today is day 5,171 of Boswell being in business. It's about 14 years if you're not good at math like me. I'm talking to an academic turned novelist with a PhD in contemporary American literature. She writes romantic comedies and thrillers. And thank you so much for being here, Ashley.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. I'm so excited to be here. And I just have to say, if you're going to read thrillers, definitely read S.A. Cosby. He's like one of my favorites, so obsessed.
He's wonderful. I love his voice. And that's the thing for me is I'm a little bit of not a scaredy cat. I prefer more cozy mysteries than thrillers. Yes. But since I read that one, I think I'm prepared to read your thrillers now.
Well, maybe in my dreams, maybe not the last Housewives.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, my coworker Parker told me the same thing. They said, beware, which is fabulous. I love that about you too, that you do both romance and thrillers. And we'll talk about that. First thing I want to say though, is we're talking about the boyfriend material, which is your newest release. And it's actually I love this about romance novels, sort of a sequel-ish to Fool Me Once, which I just read this last week. And I have to say, and this is where you're going to blush again, I read it right after rereading Happy Place by Emily Henry. And for me, Emily Henry is like difficult shoes to fill. And I was like, this is great. This is just as good as Emily Henry.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna melt straight into the floor because she is the queen. Thank you for that.
She really is the queen. And I think one thing that I found reading your book in comparison to Emily's is that for me, what's most important is approaching the book as literature. It seems like you're writing it's not just a romance, it's more than that. Is that how you approach it, or?
Yeah, that's so interesting that you say that because when people, sometimes I'll get asked, oh, I imagine your process for writing your thrillers versus your romances versus, the other genres that I'm working on that maybe we'll talk about later. I imagine those are very different because romance, you have like all the tropes to consider and the beat sheets, and you have like all the kind of pathways that are really like well laid out in romance, and readers love that. And I always feel like I'm kind of disappointing people when I say like that is not how I approach it whatsoever. Like I write all of my books using the same process. And so also, this is a little bit weird to say, but I did not start out intending with Fool Me Once, which is like what kind of opened me onto the romance path, like fully intending to write a romance. I kind of had this character, Lee Stone, in my head, and she's a party girl. As you know, she's like this chaotic party girl who just so happens to be really bad at love and really good at her job. And I was writing her story of like kind of a redemption story. That's how I thought of it at first, like her redemption arc. And throughout I was like, okay, we're spending a lot of time with Ben, like this is a major arc. And so once I realized I was writing romance, I kind of went back to the beginning. And so I think maybe that contributes to part of the sense reading like both, and I took the same approach to Boyfriend Candidate, thinking like we're starting with Alexis and who she is and what she needs to get out of this journey. And part of that is love, but part of that is like peace, catharsis, self-empowerment. And yeah, I always say that with a little bit of hesitation because you read a romance for the love story. So I'm not trying to say that that's not central in these books, but kind of my interest as the writer in writing it was like the whole package.
Yeah. And I think that's what really sets apart what my favorite romances in general is it does feel like it comes across, I think, in that you can tell it's character first and then plot and tropes and everything else second. Because I read romance to not only get that, that dose of adrenaline and the happy, whatever of
Yeah.
the happily ever after, but I also want to read it, with feeling like there's some love and care put into the characters. And
Yes.
like you as the writer really want the best for them and want them to learn and grow. So that's great to
Yeah.
hear.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the idea that you're not writing it specifically toward like, this is a thriller, so I'm going to do all these specific thriller things.
Yeah. No,
Um,
I actually like I sent my book, like an early draft of Fool Me Once. Once I finished it, I sent it to like a writer friend, CP, and I was like, "What do you think? I think it's a funny book. Like, it's definitely different than Dreams." And she was like, "Oh my God, great job with this romance. You hit all the beats perfectly, and it's like at this mark you're doing this." And I was like, "Am I?" And then I started to sweat, thinking like, "Oh my God, I got to learn about the beats because I did this like so in the dark, not knowing about any of that stuff." But maybe you just absorb like story structure, having been a huge consumer. But just to your point about like whole picture, I've been very heartened. I haven't read Happy Place by Emily Henry yet,
mhm.
but I love reading Bookstagram reviews. I know this is really silly, but I love reading Bookstagram reviews, and I'm so heartened by all the reviews that are like, "I love this book because it's a book about friendships first and
Mm.
foremost, and then like also a love story." Anyway, that's what I want to do too.
Absolutely. I mean, well, I just got it. You got to try it because it's one of those books that I did for my book club, and everyone loved it. And one of my book club members said probably the nicest compliment, which is that it felt like therapy.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and yeah, and I honestly, honest to God, felt the same way about these books as well, because it really felt like you're putting these characters through it,
Yeah.
and they're going on like a real emotional journey. And yeah, sure, of course, we've got our love interest, and he's wonderful, and he's doing his thing too. But it's an exploration of a character. Another
Yeah.
thing I really love is that reading the two together, you get a sense of Lee as a person and Alexis as a person. And even though they're wildly different people, they feel like they come from the same household.
Oh, that makes me so happy because I've fretted about that so much and thought about that. And I also, when I went, because boyfriend candidate here, I don't know why I'm just like Vanna Whiting right now with the book. Um, but it's like my first in the same universe sort of book. Like everything I write is typically standalone except for this. And so I was nervous about doing the first book justice, about like returning to a world that I've already kind of populated and trying to find like new and interesting things. And one of the challenges that I set for myself was that readers would get a new perspective on all the familiar characters, especially Lee. So I kind of leaned into the idea that Lee, the older sister of Alexis, is kind of a little bit of an antagonist in The Boyfriend Candidate. Like you see the side of her that is pushing Alexis and really very older sister like, and I am an oldest sister, so I can say this, but very much like my way is the right way, get on board, I know it's best for you, that sort
Mhm.
of thing. So yeah,
Yeah,
that was fun in doing that.
it honestly, I was going to ask about this because me personally, I'm the younger sister and I have an older sister. And it's almost the exact same dynamic. So I figured I hate to like always assume that what a writer puts in their work is based on, I don't know, their real life, their actual
Yeah.
experiences. But that is interesting to hear because I was like, I am literally, well, at least growing up, I was the shy younger sister who's like perfectly capable, but a little bit felt like I was the underdog to my
Yeah.
sister who's like the big star. Um, and a wild child too. So I thought that was very funny.
Ooh, no, I love that. Well, it's that's interesting to hear because so like for The Last Housewife, I swear I didn't mind my own experience of like
Mhm.
participating in a sex cult or anything like that. But for this book, I 100% just borrowed from my life, and being the older sister. And it was And I have my younger sister. I have one younger sister, and she's the youngest out of the four of us. And she and I have had a lot of conversations that I mined with her permission for this book. And we have had a dynamic that is evolved over time, but was definitely kind of what you described of like, I was the oldest, I was the wild child, but at the same time, you know, like
Mhm.
got good grades, like managed to keep a lid on it. And she felt very shy. And I think no matter what, if you're a younger kid, and especially the youngest kid, your life is always shaped in some part by your older siblings, whether it's like the paths they take or, you know, don't take. You're trying to
Mhm.
figure out like where you fit in the world, in the universe. And um often that's so much in relationship to who your siblings are, and like
Yeah.
whether you want to be like that or very much chart a different path. Either way, they've got this like gravitational force.
You're like, this is absolutely true. Because I always said, like, growing up, that the reason why I'm not certain ways is because I saw my older siblings. I was like,
Yep,
well, I'm not doing that.
exactly.
Or vice versa, you know? And like, and my sister was like my mom, in a way too. Like she really tried to mom me to
Yep.
death. Um,
Oh, I'm familiar with that. Call my
yes.
sister up and she'll be like, oh God, yes, Ashley
Uh-huh.
like suffers from that
Yeah, it's
compulsion
like,
as
now I'm a
well.
grown woman. I'm good. Thank you.
I mean, like, I do not need you to tell me what to do. Yeah, Alexis, it takes Alexis a long time to say that to Lee, but she gets there. Um,
She does. Yeah, and that's one of my favorite arcs in the book too, is that it felt like it really came full circle, especially seeing where Alexis started at the beginning of Fool Me Once, and then how she ends up by the end. It really did feel like she went on a journey, and I love that you see inside both of their heads, you know.
yeah,
So by the time I get to the boyfriend candidate, I already know like kind of what makes Lee tick. And so it's really cool to
yes.
see her come into her own as an older sister, and sort of figure out how she can relate to her sister as an adult.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for saying that, because that is like every book I start to write, I start with like outlining for myself why I'm interested in writing this story and what I hope readers take from it. And everything you just like very eloquently expressed was like in at the top, in like the top paragraph of this book is what I hoped. Yeah, so that's really lovely to hear.
That's great. Well, I'm very happy to hear that, because I really my boss likes to say that I talk about romance novels, I don't know, very academically or whatever. But I really do, you know, when it's done right, it's done right. And it just makes me so happy. And I love seeing these character arcs too, because that's the thing about a romance novel. And what I hope continues on in your career is I love seeing like a cast of characters that then over time we unveil to see their perspective.
Yeah.
Some of my favorite romance, I mean, of course, like Bridgerton. Like I read that back in the day,
I've
and
not read that. Obviously, watched the Netflix version, but I'm guessing the books are just like a rich universe that I need to explore.
they
That's
really are. And I mean, some of it is like of its time. But one thing I
yeah,
really appreciated with that series, and I took a lot because I read that when I was, I don't know, 16, way before the Netflix series. And but yeah, like at the beginning of the series, you've got like Gregory and Hyacinth, who are literally like, I don't know, 9 years old. And then by the end, they're featured main characters, and they've grown so much, and it's really nice to see. And like, I won't spoil, but like Gregory, it's like I loved seeing where Gregory ended up, because he ends up basically being the patriarch of his own giant family. And it was just like,
so cool.
oh,
Oh, and you grow
anyway,
with the characters.
yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
you're making me want to like write this like continuation of this series for like another decade
please
to grow
do.
with all
It's
these characters.
Well, it's so fun. And as I was reading it too, I was kind of, you know, it does feel like it could be a finite series. You know, we've seen like romance series where it's just the two or whatever,
Yeah.
um, or like just like three or four siblings. But I did see, I was like, why does Will have to be so charismatic and wonderful and lovely?
Uh-huh.
Um, would you
Yes, for
consider
reasons.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
hopefully, yeah.
All right, cool. Okay. Because I was going to say, is it, as a female writer,
Yeah.
is it at all, would that be a challenge for you writing
Oh,
like a male
huge
main character?
challenge.
Yeah.
Yes. And in fact, so I love this question because I am actually dealing with this right now because I'm
Mhm.
currently writing a dual perspective book.
Mm.
That one perspective is a male character. And I am sweating. I really want to get this right. You know, it's like
Yes.
one thing to write a man from a woman's point of view because you still
Mhm.
want to get his voice authentic, his mannerisms, his characteristics, you know, you want to get, but to actually be in his head is like a whole different level of authenticity that you have to and like verisimilitude they have to achieve. And I am just like crossing all my fingers and doing all my research. Like there will be a number of well, hopefully male readers that I give
Mhm.
early versions of this book um, to just say like, hey, how does he seem like a real person to you? Does
Yeah.
this, yeah.
Good. Good to hear, because I do wonder that sometimes about. I just read a romance, but it by a male author. Charm City Rocks by Matthew Norman, which was wonderful. And I don't think it's out yet, but I think it's out soon. And I thought it was great. But as I was reading it, I was thinking like, oh, how is he going to navigate certain scenes? Because I never thought about it before, but like a male writer, straight male writer too,
Yeah.
um, potentially doing sex scenes, I imagine perhaps it might be difficult to do so without seeming like a creeper,
Yeah, exactly.
you know?
Yep.
Um, but
And I'm like,
anyway, so
I take that just as seriously, um, as I hope straight male writers are taking writing women, that like that outside your own lived experience sort of task. If you're going to take that on, then you've got to take it like very seriously and very respectfully. So yeah, that's like weighing on my head. And so if Will was to ever, I hope I'm not spoiling anything, but yeah, if I was to ever write a romance from a male point of view, um, yeah, I'll basically you'll see me and I'll be like bald after writing it because I'll have been like
yeah,
the stress hair and
gone.
the yeah, basically.
Fair
Um,
enough. But I think that that probably speaks to your ability to probably do it successfully, because I think the last thing you want to do is not take it seriously.
yeah.
And yeah, the more male readers you can find for that, the better, because it's tough. I don't envy your job. I
Yeah.
I love to read them. I don't want to have to be the one to construct them. But
Yes.
on
Me
that
either
topic,
sometimes. Yeah.
well, on the topic, I have a really burning question, and it's
Okay.
about our main male character in this story. And it's a fairly simple question, which is, where did the idea come? What's the origin story for him being a British Texan?
Okay, so truthfully, I never do this with my characters. Like, I'm one of those writers, you'll hear writers talk about like the fact that their characters are kind of like blank faced and just kind of amorphous figures in their imagination as they're constructing. I'm one of those people. I never fan cast, or I don't know if it's fan cast if you're the creator, whatever it is. I never cast celebrities
Yeah.
in my head, except for this book. I just had this very strong feeling that Logan Arthur, who's our love interest and our main male character, was Roy Kent, like Roy Kent's spirit from Ted
Oh,
Lasso, um, taken and put inside the body of a Texas-born aspiring or politician and aspiring governor. And part of that, I started writing Logan before kind of finding the Roy Kent inspiration of it all. I started writing this like very grumpy, gruff, politician who really had a low tolerance for bullshit, which is a hard thing to have if you're a politician, because that's just what you're surrounded by all the time. And you really have to be able to like swim well in it. And so he was just like constitutionally not like fit for this role that he had. And the more I started thinking about him being like kind of an odd duck out in a lot of different senses. So I thought, maybe he would have like a British accent, like all these ideas I was kind of just playing with. And then I swear I had like some sort of moment of epiphany, and it was probably like while I was taking a shower or out on a walk, because those are when my ideas hit me. And I was like, oh my God, I think I'm writing Roy Kent. He was like a Texas politician.
Nice.
And then that just like released my mind.
Okay, good to know. And you said that's from Ted Lasso?
From Ted Lasso. Have you seen it?
I have not.
Okay.
At first, because I heard Roy, at first I thought for some reason you're talking about Succession, which is a completely...
Oh my God. Which I'm also obsessed with, both those
right,
shows.
Yeah. My husband's obsessed with that. And so he always talks about, whatever. And yes, my condolences or whatever for the finale.
I know, my husband and I are so divided. I hated it, he loved it. So yeah, no spoilers here.
Yeah, no.
People who are watching. But yeah, no, so Roy Kent is a soccer player who is the most foul-tempered, bad-mouthed soccer player, who just is incredibly irate and gruff, has a heart of gold buried, much like Logan, buried very deep under all those layers of like spikes. But essentially they both also kind of suffer from the idea that they are like among a sea of fools, like the person who's straight seeing. And it's often true for Roy Kent's character in Ted Lasso, and it's often true for Logan Arthur in The Boyfriend Candidate. So I just had so much fun with that.
He is honestly like, every time he pops off on somebody, I was like, yes. So funny. And I think also too, like, did you want to make him specifically that like foul-mouthed because Alexis is so not?
Exactly. I loved the idea of two diametrically opposed people, like true opposites attract. She is so shy and so people-pleasing, and just constantly thinking about other people and how best to like appease them and make them comfortable, even to her own detriment. And Logan is the opposite, where he's saying the first thing that pops into his head, and he is just like to a fault, honest to a fault. And he's really funny and he's direct and everything, but honestly, that's kind of to his detriment. So I really liked the idea that both characters, while being really diametrically opposed in their personalities, were both trying to fit themselves into like lives that didn't really fit who they were. Like Logan is trying to tamp himself and his personality down to be a polished politician and play nice, and Alexis is trying to like be the extrovert that she is not, to kind of like lead this big star, become a star like her older sister. And so that like meeting each other would be this thing that like was very soothing, because they recognized what the other is doing on some level, accepted the other for who they were in a way that everyone else that they're surrounded by doesn't exactly. Everyone else is kind of trying to change them and pull them in these directions. So they're like islands in the storm for one another, and they both take a little bit from the other. Like Alexis helps Logan be kind of like take the edge off a little bit when he needs to, and Logan helps her put the edge on when she needs to.
Yeah, it's honestly really like one of my favorite things to see over and over again in the book is how much they're like sort of soothed by each other.
Yeah.
You know, because Alexis finds like being difficult, very like but he just does it so easily that she's able to see like, oh wow, it actually is okay to like speak your mind, and you can do it in a way without, you know, cursing people out, calling them probably some of my favorite curse words ever too. He has a great vocabulary.
Thank you. I had so much fun with that.
Oh my God. Just,
Like,
yeah. If you're going to read this book for anything and if you love curse words, this is the book for you.
I think my favorite one, if I could be so bold as to like
Papa.
curse in this, is this family PG rated? Is ne'er-do-well fuckboy.
An amazing one. Yeah, I personally, him calling people a twat is my favorite.
That was so fun.
Especially because, you know, he said it with like a little bit of a British twang, and I've just, that was my happy place, honestly. That made me.
So this is the fun part of my job, is like sitting around being like, is it better? Okay, twat, 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 you know, or like, like ne'er-do-well fuckboy, like what, you know, like how do I figure out what works best in this scene? You know, that's like, I think
a twat for you when you want like a plosive, like bam, and then ne'er-do-well fuckboy whenever you really want to just like lay it out for them, like this is your problem, dude.
Yep. that's my job.
I love it. I also want to shout out to just some of these side characters, like Nora. Love her. So glad to see, you know, she had her own arc in this book. And you got Carrie Berry, who ridiculous name. I love him so much. And I love how you sort of lampoon those things too, like when she finds out, when Alexis finds out that his name is Carrie Berry, and she's like, really?
Yeah.
Poor guy.
Really?
But
and he's like, well, your name is equally ridiculous.
Like,
that's
he
my
tried.
absurdist. Yeah, he did try.
He failed though.
Yeah.
He needs to marry Matt Bomer so his name can be Carrie Bomer, and then we'll be all fine.
I mean, he's from your lips to God's ears as far as he's concerned.
I'm sure he's screaming somewhere just at the idea. So.
Exactly.
Okay, so this is random, and I wasn't gonna maybe ask this until much later when I ran out of questions, but I had to ask you something very important to me and me alone. We go at some point to give Alexis a little bit of a makeover to a salon called Acid Betty.
Yeah.
Does this salon exist, or are you a Drag Race fan?
Oh my God, no, it doesn't exist, and I've never watched Drag Race.
Oh my gosh, really?
Did I pull
something? How did you come to the name Acid Betty? Because maybe it's just my ignorance. I don't really get like is that a reference to something?
Literally not a reference to anything. I was thinking or just, you know, my long history of spending too much on getting my hair highlighted and going to like, you know, very cool, hip salons that are much hipper than me, and being surrounded by, and they all have names like Cut or Upper Hand, or, you know, like just like very kind of like aggressive names that are slightly intimidating. And I was like, Acid Betty. I think I had a few different names and I just went with that.
That is so funny, because it really, and I don't really watch Drag Race, but I've seen enough of it, and I happen to know of Acid Betty in particular. She's a fabulous queen. Highly recommend. She's a little bit.
Be Googling this furiously right after we get off.
She's a little bit controversial. She's very mean. So honestly, in keeping, that's the thing, is like I was like, this must have been based on Acid Betty, because not that they were mean to Alexis in the book, but
there's definitely some of that. Yeah.
Very like holier than thou, and that felt very like on brand. So okay, I had to get that off my chest. So I appreciate.
Don't you love when like something is unintentional but it works so perfectly?
Absolutely.
I would love to take credit for this.
Yeah, do it just retroactively. No one's doing any fact checking on this. Go for it. So, okay, one thing I wanted to talk about, and this is what I told you I was going to maybe not spring on you earlier, but so this is a book set in Texas.
Yep,
You live in Texas,
I do.
right? And I actually read a couple of interviews that you're a Navy brat, so you kind of moved all over the place.
Oh
Do you
yes.
consider yourself like a Texan now, or?
I know. So Texas is where I've lived the longest technically.
Mhm.
So I think by like whatever rules there are, I probably am a Texan, but I do not feel like a Texan. And
Mm.
that is no shade to Texas or Texans or anything. Um, but it just I feel like I am a transplant who's happened to just live here for a really long time.
Fair
Um,
enough.
yeah.
So the reason why I ask is because I actually was born and raised in Texas.
Oh.
So I'm a transplant too. I'm living here
Yeah,
in Wisconsin because my husband is getting his doctorate in poetry because we
that's
love being poets.
amazing. That was my dream once upon a time.
I read that too, and I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's he's making it work. I'm actually really impressed. But I was just like, wow, I love being poor, yay.
I love that. But you
But
know, like art for art's sake.
exactly. We're making it work. But yeah, so I feel like part of this whole idea of setting up a virtual event with you is because
Yeah.
I was like, wow, I was a Texan at some point. And now I don't even know if I really consider myself from anywhere in particular. I lived in
Yeah.
Texas until I was 16. Then we lived in Oklahoma until basically I was 32. Um,
Hmm.
so and I don't want to claim Oklahoma. I'm sorry,
I was
it's
gonna
not.
say Oklahoma's a quite a place. I've
Yeah,
had some family living who've lived there and done a lot of visiting.
yeah,
Um,
I have many friends in Oklahoma, and I
yeah.
love them. But the state, not so much. Anyway, so like, yeah, kind of selfishly, I wanted to talk to you because I read this book really feeling the nostalgia, I think,
Oh, I
for
love
the whole
that.
state. And especially, I love the decision to set it in Austin in particular because it is
Yeah.
so liberal
Yep.
in Austin. Was it important to you to, because obviously the very political topics, was it
Hmm.
important to you to feature, like Democrats in Texas, et cetera?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that you get being a transplant, as you and I both know, is just always being able to come to everything, come to a state, especially a state like Texas, where there's so much state pride and it's like some
Mhm.
people's entire personalities, which you probably remember.
Yeah.
But just like always approach it with a perspective, with that kind of outsider perspective, which I feel like is a gift. And so I knew I wanted to write about a love story, or the story of a woman when it started with Lee, working within the context of politics, liberal, kind of democratic politics in Texas, because that was my life, this kind of niche world that I was living in while I, started my writing career. I worked for this like politically minded think tank that would try to support a lot of progressive policy in Texas and around the country. And I promise that's all I'll say about it for anyone whose eyes are glazing over. But basically, I lived in this world in my day job where I saw how many deeply hardworking, progressive people, Democrats in Texas there were, and how they were devoting their entire lives to kind of trying to protect people against the really egregious and harmful laws that are being passed here, and are just like, will never give up. And I've had so much admiration for kind of like the vocal activist groups that we were working with, because we were always the wonky nerds, in whatever group. Um, but just the people who were devoting their lives to kind of to this. And I just thought like, what an incredible underdog story, A, and B, there's just something so um there's such a cognitive dissonance sometimes, or something so peculiar about the experience of living in an urban center like Austin or Houston or even Dallas, because
Mhm.
all of these are places vote blue, when it comes down to voting time, but to be in a state just like surrounded by a sea of red. And so that kind of like intention within the state of Texas, but I know in a lot of other states too, there's that tension. And I really liked the idea of kind of telling that story of people who were working really hard um, to do what, in my opinion, as the author, are good things, pass
Mhm.
progressive policies, change things for the better to help more people in places where their stories often get washed out
Mhm.
by, of course, all the terrible news. Um, so that was just my like, I guess you could call it a political fantasy on top of writing a romance is imagining a Texas in which it is possible to like pass a climate change bill or have this Democratic gubernatorial candidate be a
Mhm.
real contender.
Absolutely. Yeah, it gave me and there's a Texas connection in this too, but it really gave me like red, white, and royal blue vibes in
Oh
that
my God.
regard.
You
Because
like literally that is my inspiration text. That is my like
right?
yes.
Yeah.
I
It's one of those
cried
that
reading that book.
yeah, when people are looking for like this is the book that'll just make you feel really good,
Yep.
but also there's politics involved, it's still wonderful. Yeah.
Yes. That and
Um,
like, oh God, the reading that book was so cathartic. So I
mhm.
hope that like reading Fool Me Once and The Boyfriend Candidate, if it even produces like 1/10 the cathartic experience for readers, like I will be so happy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would call it a close to a spiritual successor for me because like I seriously I said this in my recommendation for the book, but I'm practically allergic to politics.
Yeah.
I don't enjoy engaging in it. I avoid it whenever possible, and so yeah, but and this is also I used to be a teacher. I used to teach in a public school,
Oh boy,
and
doing the Lord's work.
well, not anymore.
Yeah, but
But
still.
and that's another thing too, is as I was reading this, like there are some beats that you hit in this book that are like there's a walkout at one point. I
Yeah.
participated in a walkout, and the reality for us was that it was a crushing defeat.
Yeah.
But it's cathartic to read books like this where things work out, maybe not necessarily how the characters wanted it to.
Right.
It's not like it's all, sunshine and roses for these
Yeah.
characters. Um, but there's a common ground that we find in the book that it's like it's hopeful. It's like I hope to see that someday,
Yes.
in the near future too. So
Yeah. Well, I was very much inspired by reading a lot of news stories and watching, live footage of teacher walkouts, educators kind of like occupying state capitals in protest of like losing pension benefits and all sorts of benefits. And I was watching all of that with like both, sadness in my heart that it had to be happening, but also just amazement, like the heroics of those actions. And I was like, okay, um, let's put this really shy character in a position to be like needing to step up in this way, and how would she feel about it?
exactly. Yeah, because and that's what a great way to force her to grow without it being tied to him in particular. That's
Yes.
another thing I really appreciate is that because I read a lot of romance, and sometimes I'm like, well, we could separate the two a bit so that it feels more like these are characters growing separately toward each
Yeah.
other.
Yes.
And it really feels like that, especially with Alexis. She is a real person. She has her faults. She doesn't do great all the time.
She does not.
Um,
Nope.
yeah, and it's just like so intensely believable. Yeah, I
Thank
commend you
you.
really, because
Thank you.
and another thing too that I wanted to ask this specifically about Alexis because at the beginning of the book we see, you know, so much inside her head. She's so in her head
Yeah.
because she's so shy. But the things that she says are just so funny, and I'm wondering, how do you generate that sort of almost stream of consciousness where, like, at one point she hurts her ankle and she thinks, oh no, like she almost starts crying, not because she's in pain, but because she's now a burden.
Yeah.
How do you how do those sort of inner thoughts come out in writing? Is it just natural, or
Okay, I hope this doesn't like I hope this doesn't get me like kicked out or whatever of writers club. But because it didn't work, admitting this did not work out very well for Jeremy Strong, another Succession reference. But I method act with my characters.
okay.
Like I basically fully embody my characters when I'm writing my books. And so I try really, really hard to kind of just like live as like Alexis Stone, a very shy, bookish, introverted librarian who, you know, what would her first order of concern be when harming herself? You know, it would be like, not, oh my gosh, I'm so upset, this hurts so much, how am I going to get down? But oh my God, people are going to have to pay attention to me and like help me, and this is not the kind of attention that I wanted. And it's very fun doing that with my romances. Like, I kid you not, I drank a lot of like tequila and had a lot of fun when I was writing Fool Me Once, and, you know, kind of play acted a little bit as Alexis. It goes a little bit darker when I'm writing my thrillers, I will admit. And like, I kind of fall down those rabbit holes for a few months. Yeah, so that, again, hopefully that's an unpopular thing to say. I think more writers do it than.
Yeah, I think I'm remembering vaguely, I can't remember the author, but I remember hearing about an author who I think wrote maybe YA, but would essentially, like, if a character is handcuffed and trying to escape somewhere, she literally would do that. Like, she would
Yeah.
go out and do that task just so she could not only like make sure it's possible to,
Yeah.
you know, go through that scene, but then also to sort of, yeah, like feel the same feelings and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, I
I
think
don't think
there's some
it's,
experiences where you're like, I really don't know what this is like. And so I need to, you know, and I guess if you really care about it being as authentic, which it doesn't always need to be. Like, you don't always, as a writer, it's not like always the highest order need to like describe, for example, how to get out, how the like handcuffs feel in this moment. Like, maybe what's much more important is describing like your character's inner journey of anxiety and then triumph of, you know, like but yeah, I think that like living in the head of your character has been very much like how I've managed to do it, which means that I always am looking inside myself, figuring out what piece of me I'm gonna like scalpel out and put in this character so that I have a bridge of connection, and it's like easy to figure out my way in to this person.
that's amazing to hear. Because I mean, like I said, I read a lot of romances, and then I feel like often, especially in that genre in particular, it's
Yeah.
very easy to just play into the tropes
Yeah.
and not really focus on yeah, like developing the characters in a way that feels believable and really like setting them up. I'm not trying to trash anyone in particular, but I just, like, you know, I see a lot of these things and they're not always successful. And
Yeah.
I think figuring out finally that for me, it's about the characters first.
Yes.
And then all the other stuff, like, I don't even like the cheating trope, which is why I think I
Has
probably
gotten me into
didn't.
hot water.
Well,
These books.
I'm here to say that I don't love it, and I loved Fool Me Once. Like, I literally, I think you're probably the reason why when I pick up a book now that has that trope, I won't immediately dismiss it.
Mm-hmm.
Because when done right and done in a way that really, it's not surface level, it's extremely deeply explored,
Yeah.
in multiple aspects of it are explored. So it's okay. That's really all we need.
Yeah, well, it's first of all, it's a thing that's kind of like happened in the past, and it is part and parcel of Lee Stone's like central flaw that she
Mhm.
needs to resolve. And I really like the idea of cheating being one of those things that is unfortunately really common. And I think that's why a lot of people don't like to see it in their romance, because they're like, I have seen it in real life and I don't want to touch it. But it's this really common thing. And I think I just find the subject very fascinating, like why people cheat, I think is like a very psychologically rich territory.
Absolutely.
If you're willing to go there.
Yes, absolutely. And it really like reinforces Lee's overall sort of impulsive to the point of being detrimental to her
Oh,
maybe not her
extreme
well-being, but her mental well-being.
self-destructiveness,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, that
Mhm.
think about that's like a terribly self-destructive thing to
Mhm.
do, um, is to cheat on someone when you love them, you know?
Yes.
Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, no, but
Gosh.
that did, I think one of the downsides of not really kind of thinking about when I set out to write Fool Me Once, and then kind of learned by the boyfriend candidate, but I was describing like not having read the romance beat sheets and like all that stuff.
Mhm.
I think one of the things that was a downside was not really being aware of the absolute no-go territories for a lot of romance readers. I
Mhm.
knew what things I liked as a reader and was okay with. But it was very eye-opening to see
Uh-huh.
like how, I had fellow authors who, and like, this is no shade, this is just like, it was very eye-opening to me, who were like, oh yeah, totally, you blurb this book, sounds great. And then once they realized there was cheating in it, they had to kind of be like, sorry, that's a trigger for me. Like I like
Wow.
can't. And I was like, oh yeah, this is serious. Like people take this
Interesting.
really seriously. So that was eye-opening.
I love that. I mean, don't take my advice on anything, but I love the idea of you like tackling those, don't go there tropes, because I really do think it's the mark of a good writer to take something that you think is going to be like, oh, I never want to read about this again, and it's actually awesome. Like it's really all about like taking your characters seriously, taking your
Yeah.
world seriously, and respecting them too. Is the other
And
thing.
like I think a lot of it is respecting your reader too.
Mhm.
So I guess what the way I'm thinking about that is like, before I realized it was just a no go, like
Mhm.
Chernobyl sort of situation, like do not set foot. um I just very much respected my reader's ability to give Lee a lot of grace and kind of like want to understand all the context and the kind of psychological reasons why she had, done some of the made the mistakes that she's made in the past. And so,
Yeah.
um, yeah, that's.
Are there any tropes that you in particular love or hate?
Ooh, yeah, I know. It's like everyone has their list, don't they?
Yes.
So obviously all the ones that I've used before are like at the top of my list. So obviously I'm a second chance
Mhm.
girly, like love enemies to lovers, love a good fake dating. That's those I've explored. But I really, really want to do friends to lovers because I'm just loving that right now, the idea of
Mhm.
just this long, long slow burn, because I
Yes.
love the slow burn, as you can
Yes.
probably tell from my
This
books.
is definitely the slowest burn, but it's great.
Yeah,
Oh,
I realized about myself that I like all of the lead up
mhm.
more than I like the couple getting together.
Mhm.
So I just like, I don't know what that says about me, or it's just a thing of like everyone has their own taste, but I love the build up. And so in my
Yeah.
books, I try to make the build up like
Mhm.
last as long as I possibly can.
Well, and it really it creates a believable relationship, like
Yeah.
as opposed to a just a romance, in that like by the time they consummate, they have they have really done the work to the point where it feels like they're, you know, friends, they're ready to become lovers,
Yep.
and it really feels earned in a way that's like, and I don't know if that's because me personally, I also prefer that, if that's because that's kind of my experience with romantic relationships.
Yes.
Because I'm finding with my romance book club, it feels like our personal experiences with romance in our own lives really feeds into what we like to see on the page too.
You just like psychoanalyze me in a way that I never have. But I'm just realizing like, oh my God, my husband and I dated for like 10 years off and on before we like finally got together and got married. Oh my God, that no wonder. Um,
Yeah.
Also, my experiences with various fandoms as like a
Mhm.
fan of shows like Vampire Diaries or like so on and so forth, where I'm always like shipping the couple like the Klaus and Caroline,
Oh my God, I was gonna
or
say.
yes, where it's just like you're living for these crumbs and these
Mm,
moments and you're constructing just like pure romantic gold out of them. And
yes.
as a fan, you either like very rarely get this moment where there's like, oh, they're now happily together, or you do, but it's taken away. I don't know. So it's like maybe that's how I learned to appreciate romance, is like
Yeah.
being a fan of couples like that. Wow, I'm learning a lot about myself today.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you,
you don't
Rachel.
have to pay me. It's fine. I'll
Yeah, I'll Venmo you your therapy your therapy
yeah.
fee later.
But maybe it's because I read so much of this stuff that I've like, I actually I was not a full-time romance reader until the pandemic. It was always
Mm,
my treat during the summer in between semesters.
yeah,
That was always my go-to.
I love
But
that.
then I realized, yeah, over time, it's like this, I keep coming back to it because it really gives me something. So now I
Yeah.
really think of it like if I ever went back to school for my PhD, I might do a dissertation on romance.
Oh my God, I'd be the
But
first in line to read that. Do it.
I have a lot to say.
Yeah.
Um, well, okay, so we have about, I don't know, 5 more minutes left. And I did want to ask you, and sorry if I'm putting you on the spot at all, but do you have any recommendations or are there any books you're reading currently that you're like, you got to read this?
Oh my God, yes. So no, I was very much put on this earth to talk about other people's books. Like that's
Hmm.
why I exist. I have just finished Will They or Won't They by Ava Wilder, which is coming out June 6th. And it is magnificent. I don't know, Rachel, if you've read it yet.
I read her How to
How to
Make It in Hollywood,
Fake It
How to
in
Fake It.
Hollywood. Yep.
Mhm.
Okay,
Okay,
so I loved How to
writing.
Fake It so much. Like, loved the way that Ava wove together like the glitzy, fizzy fun of Hollywood with a lot of like deeper, more substantive storylines about these two people, Gray and Ethan. Clearly, I read it a year ago and I still remember their names and everything about it. So really, I'm kind of in awe of her talent. And then Will They or Won't They is just another, like, she returns to Hollywood, Ava does, for her subject, and these are like this second chance romance between two old co-stars who fell in love fast and furious, and then it blew up, and now they're like enemies. And of course they're forced to do a reunion show, so it's everything you want in like kind of a second chance enemies to lover. So highly recommend people pre-ordering that at Boswell Book Company. And yes, and I loved, of course, Meet Me at the Lake by Carly Fortune, to
Mhm.
talk about a book that's currently out.
Mhm.
Because I have a very bad habit, since I read books so far in advance, I'm always
Same.
talking about the ones that are coming. And yeah,
Yes.
You
I'm
know
always
that.
like, it's coming out in November, but it's really good.
Exactly. And you're like, just remember it, write it down somewhere. And people are like, I'm not going to do that. But yes, Meet Me by the Lake, which you can get now, I really loved from Carly Fortune. And I love the romance that she writes, both in Every Summer After and this, her sophomore novel. But I think the thing I love about her books most of all is getting to escape to the Canadian like lake
Ooh,
district,
yes.
like this beautiful, nostalgic, it feels like you're actually like re-entering your childhood summers.
Mhm.
So I just love that about her books. So those are
Amazing.
some romance recs.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, it's one thing I've found with these romance novels is it feels like I'm traveling. Um,
Yes.
so in this case, I was visiting home, but then in other cases, yeah, like a similar thing. I read a book that was set at like a national park, and I was like, oh, this is
Ooh.
fun. I've never been to a remote mountainous national park before, but now I have kind of. So.
Don't you love that? That's why I love small town romances too,
Mhm.
because I just love the feeling that I'm gonna go like back to this cute little town, in their series, back to this cute little town that I love with all the neighbors.
Exactly. Okay, so I will tell you a couple just because I feel like I'm a romance bloodhound, and
Ooh.
I've found a secret power of mine, which is spotting it in a series that's not actually a romance. Um, so one that I've just discovered, there's two books out already, but this one, the first one is called Viviana Valentine Gets Her Man,
Ooh.
and it's set in the 40s. And this lady, oh, sorry, 50s, and she's like a My Girl Friday sort of character,
Ooh.
who becomes a private investigator through the course of the thing. And there's a romance in there, but it's not maybe necessarily where you think it's gonna go. Anyway, so that's
Ooh.
my favorite new thing, is to find romances. And that's why I'm also reading, I'm in the middle of reading this one. I'm liking it so far. This just came out. It's called The Blighted Stars.
What a good
And another
title.
thing is I love a sci-fi romance. Um,
I need
and I
more sci-fi romance recommendations, so this is amazing.
Yes. I've got them aplenty. Sci-fi
Okay.
romances like if Winter's Orbit, fabulous. Um, Gosh, now I'm of course blanking, but I just read, Jesse Mahalik has
Okay.
these sci-fi romances that are like, it's like Star Wars, but then also a romance. So it's like a bunch of sort of Leia and Han type
Ooh.
interaction going on. Yeah, I know.
Oh, I like
So
that.
Jessie Mahalik, she's got
Jesse Mahalik.
several like trilogies
Do you
out.
have like a recommendation, like Rachel recommends page on Boswell website? If
You know
not,
what?
you need
I
that because I
do.
would just go there and be like, what is Rachel reading? What does she recommend? Like
Well,
her
funny you should
taste?
ask, because
Yeah.
I do have it. All of us staff members have a page, and so you'll see all of my staff recs on there. And I do read more than romance, but the secretly most of my non-romance. Daniel linked it in the chat.
Perfect. Oh, thank you,
Most of my
Daniel.
non-romance books have like a tiny bit of romance in them
Isn't that
because
the
I can't.
best feeling when you're like, okay, here we go with this exciting thriller or fantasy, and then
Mhm.
like you start to realize, oh my God, there is also like a really good romantic subplot. I can feel it starting.
I love it. It's my favorite thing.
Yes.
Yeah, and like, I talked to Sangu Mandana last like winter, and her book, The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, which
I love
oh,
that book so much.
it is like it's the happiest
It
read I've
is.
ever had,
Yes.
honestly. And I read it like that. I read it, I think, in
I'm
like
so
8 hours.
happy cozy romantic fantasy is a thing.
Yes. Yes, yeah. So a romantic fantasy is another happy place for me, and that's, I think, probably my like pinnacle of like, you got to read this. Everyone can find something to enjoy about it, and yes, there's a
Yes.
romance in it, but no, that's not the point. Tiny
There's also tiny witches
witches, and
that
they're
will
so
steal your
perfect.
heart. Yeah,
Yeah,
we could talk like
yeah.
this
So I'm
forever
I'm
because that
grateful
was
to
what also
you.
happened to me with Fourth Wing, which I
Mm,
know like the entire world is reading right now. that I started it for dragons, like came for the dragons. I was like, tell me more about these dragons, and like stayed for the like hot romance. And I was like, this is giving me everything. Yep.
Yes, I'm glad you said that, because I read that recently because a friend of mine was very excited about reading it, and I saw that and I said they just sent me the galley for it. So what I did was I read it really fast, loved it, did not expect to love
Because you
it.
can read it super fast. It's so
Yes,
bingeable.
yeah, and I'm like, there's more coming. I can't wait.
And we only have to
Yeah,
wait till November. We don't even have to wait till.
I know, isn't
Every one
that?
of my conversations lately has involved Fourth Wing. I'm very obsessed with it. My husband has been laughing at me. Like, you are too obsessed with this book. And I was like, this is my job. This is like my job, to get obsessed with books. So
Absolutely. Yes, I'm the same way. I feel like I talk at him and he's like, that's great, honey. That's great. No interest at all.
does he give you poetry recommendations of like poets
Mm.
he enjoys from his?
No.
No?
No, it's very like we're mutually disinterested in certain things, but we're watching The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel together. So
Okay,
that's,
love that.
we've got that in common.
Yes. Well, you got your own lanes. That's also really important in a relationship.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh no, we've got completely separate lives in some regards. And then we have dinner together and enjoy a good episode of Barry or Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. It's good fun.
Love it. I love that.
Ashley, it was a joy to talk to you. Suffice it to say, I am excited to hear about whatever comes next for you. I don't want to ask, I said I was going to ask you about what's coming next, but I know you have Midnight is the Darkest Hour.
Yep.
Is your next
October
thriller. I might read it. I'm gonna.
Really heavy romance.
Okay.
Like really central,
I
substantive
will
romance.
read it. Done.
And nowhere near The Last Housewife in terms of like haunting your dreams sort of situation.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
You should. The text messages I was getting from Parker as they read The Last Housewife were so iconic. I wanted to frame them because I had no idea what was going on, but it was apparently wonderful. Wonderful, but also trigger warnings.
Yes.
Lots of content warnings.
Yeah.
So, and then do you plan on doing more romances, I assume? I hope.
Yes. Though I am taking like a slightly different direction and kind of laying down the romantic comedy mantle for a little while. I hope to return, but focusing on like romantic angst and romantic drama, and yes, doing that. And I'm so excited about this new direction.
Well, I think you're very qualified to go in that direction too. So I cannot wait. As far as I'm concerned, it's like Emily Henry and then Ashley Winstead.
Oh
as far
my
as
God.
I'll follow you. I will follow you.
Yeah, you're gonna again. My cheeks feel so hot. Thank you.
Oops, sorry. I'll say some more things that make you really think about your life choices.
Yeah, exactly. Back to therapizing me.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much for talking to me. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too.
I had such a great time, Rachel. Literally, I'll talk to you anytime. Like, I'll just publish more books so I can have an excuse to come back.
Done. Exactly.